Welcome to the 2 o'clock session, Forced to Move. I'm Bettina Wyngaard, I'm the facilitator for this session, and I'd like to introduce these three lovely authors with me. Fred, I'm going to start with you. You've done an MA in creative writing at WITS, and you are now doing your PhD. What, you wondering about it? Fred is the author of 17 books, non-fiction, fiction, short stories, long version. The book we'll be discussing today is Crossing the River. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bettina, for that glowing introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for gracing us with your presence, braving the cold out there. We are honored.
Thank you, Fred. Next is Joy Watson. Joy, of course, is a feminist researcher. You need to explain that to us just a little bit later on. And you focus on public policy and spending.
Yes.
You are currently doing your PhD, and unlike Fred, you're almost at the end of it, and your PhD is on rape and public policy.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. You're also a regular contributor to Daily Maverick Life. And The Other Me is your debut novel. It was a lovely read. You, of course, co-edited with Amanda Gou's Nasty Women Talk Back. Yeah, but that was that. This is
My baby.
Your baby. This is your baby, yes. And last but not least, Dianne Du Toit Albertze. Dianne is she tells me, just told me now, a drama teacher at Hoërskool Okiep. And I just need to warn you, Diane's book is in Afrikaans, so the questions directed to Dianne will be in Afrikaans. If anyone has difficulty with that, we'll translate, but it will be in Afrikaans. Dianne, you regularly contribute to Litnet for their theater, and you studied, jy het studeer nagraadsdrama in regie. Yep. En jy was in 2020 deel van die Jake Scherwel mentorskapprogram. Ja. Baie welkom. Bottleneck, breek nek, breek bek.
Hy kan dit ook breek.
Ja, natuurlijk. Is jou debuut. All three books will be available for sale afterwards, and the authors will be available to take photographs and to sign books. So please, afterwards, go get the books. It's brilliant books, all three of them. And you will enjoy it. So get the books, get the authors to sign it. Fred, you described Crossing the River as a pure young adult novel. What makes it pure?
My previous, I was making a comparison between this book and my previous book, 2 Tons of Fun.
Yeah.
2 Tons of Fun, although it features a 14-year-old girl as the main protagonist, it's not written as a young adult novel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. But when I read the book, I thought, it would actually be I almost want to say disgrace to label it as young adult, because grown-ups would love the book. It is an engaging book. It is topical about so many things. So while you may bill it as a young adult book,
No. Blame it on the marketers.
And the publisher is here. So
Yes, of course. Yes, of course.
Of course. Joy and Dianne, both of you are accomplished writers in other areas. How did the writing process for this differ from your other writing?
I think that for me, my other writing was, because I work as a researcher on sort of social development issues, I think that as South Africans, we know the state of and the reality of our socio-economic and our political context. So I found that writing in that space was becoming heavy. It's a broader manifestation of the kind of crisis we're all living in. Like when you're writing it, it weighs on you, and it was feeling heavy. And so I wanted to embark on a project that was make-believe, and that felt lighter and creative and
this was
fun.
the result of lighter.
Of having fun, yes.
See, the other person who interviewed you is laughing loudly as well. Dianne?
So ja, die skakel vir my was mos nou van drama na prosa toe. En ja, ek het 'n behoefte gehad dat woorde nie net ophou by een kunstefees of een speelvlak en dan gaan dit nêrens heen nie. But ja, daar is seker goed om in ag te neem wat Trouise my my uitgewer baie saam met my gewerk het. Want met 'n dramastuk is daar tog iemand wat inkyk op wat gebeur. Daar's ligte, daar's kostuums, waar in 'n boek is daai goeters wat alles beskryf moet word. So dit het regtig vir my uitgedaag om fyner te kyk en om meer geduldig te wees met woorde. Want ek dink baie keer when it comes to performative writing, it's easy to just after a couple of drafts, just take it and somewhere give it another flavor on stage. Where with paper, you can't really somewhere do that. Yeah.
But at the same time, and I'd like the two of you to come into this as well, for each book, each text that you write, every reader will read it differently because the reader reads through the lens of their own experience, and the experience might be very different to yours. Fred, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's. I find with every new book that I write, I develop, I grow as a writer. Sometimes to the confusion of my readers, because they expect a certain kind of style or approach to a story that they think this is how Fred Khumalo writes. But now I've written this book from the perspective of a 14-year-old girl who has a totally different experience from mine. And she's a rural girl, she's Zimbabwean, and I'm an old urban black man from South Africa. So this disjuncture is interesting. How people have read the book or how they read the book, obviously, is credit to me as a writer to say I help excavate their own experiences and their past, and they bring their own prejudices, their background, and so on into the reading experience, which is why we write.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to add?
So, in fact, one of the sponsors of this festival last night at the opening bash was saying they'd like to invite me to come and talk to the staff because they're fighting on Makar because they have different takings of the other me. And I think that's what makes books so powerful, right? It's through storytelling that we make sense of the human condition and experience. And I think that what brings a book to life is how the reader engages with the written word and weaves their own story to make sense of what is on paper. And that's invariably going to be different for everyone. And so you engage with the material, and the magic is to use it to think through issues. And in fact, it was one of the things that I very deliberately, while this is a story and it's meant to be fun, we can't also escape who we are and our social context. So there are issues of identity, the politics of identity, our socioeconomic context. And I take some of those debates without writing a political book and making this a thesis, it's a story. I very deliberately wanted to hand these discussions to the reader and say, I'm not resolving these issues for you. I'm handing it to you to say, what do you think about these debates that we're grappling with as a society?
Okay, thanks. Now, what I'd like all three of you to do next is to, without giving away the storyline, if you can, describe your protagonist, please.
Okay, ek sal sommer begin.
Okay.
Okay, harregat, flamboyant, uitgesproke, voorbarig, vuilgat, intelligent, a bietjie all over the place and a bietjie unstable. And I think anti-heroes has become nogal very popular in mainstream of now, hedendaagse culture. And I think a lot of readers can also feel comfortable with this character and relate to the character because the character goes out almost without the fear of doing stuff right or perfect and just embracing the flawedness of life as well. Being like, ja, julle dink al klaar is 'n stuk gemors, so girl, I've got nothing to lose.
Okay, maar nou moet jy girl se naam ook sê asseblief.
Oh, Dora, yes. Dora, she's from Carolisberg, a small mining community in Namakwaland. Was raised up by her oma and her ma en haar pa.
Afrikaans praat.
Yes, okay, yeah. Hey, I'm trying to be gaaf. Ek is so in die stad.
Very flamboyant, like that character.
Yeah, so a small town girl with big dreams, and when she comes in the city, it slowly but surely crumbles a bit. And something that Audrey Jantjies also journeys on in her book, As die Katjie Pieringblom, is this idea of small town girls getting lost in the big city. En moet bottleneck breekbek, is dit 'n girl wat, okay, sy raak lost, en sy besluit sommer, you know what, let's not be afraid of the dark world, and sommer jump into it. So Dora is a fearless, yeah, onbeskofte, but also kind-hearted character. Yeah. And I think a lot of people can relate to her. Even though some might even find her a bit repulsive, she is who she is.
Ek dink die repulsive is die eerste woord wat gaan opkom hier, hoor. Maar ons praat later daaroor, Joy.
Actually, everything that she said. So we wrote very much the same character. Lolly, in my book, so what I wanted to do is create a deeply troubled character, a character in crisis, and plant this person in a social context in crisis. And so you have the interplay of the character and the South African society, a person and a landscape in crisis. So she is flamboyant, alles, everything that you said. But she's also intelligent and savvy and broken and vulnerable. And so there's this juxtapositioning of her strength and her intelligence against her vulnerability and her brokenness. And essentially, the story is about this character who creates an alter ego, the other me, who steps in when she's not coping to keep her safe. So and she sees this person as a person, and there's this dual character of when Lolly's not coping, the other Lolly steps in to save the day.
Okay, but now I just need to ask one follow-up question. You started out saying you wanted to write a light book,
Yes.
something light to get away, and then you say it's a person in crisis in a society in crisis. Okay.
I think that so the book plays very heavily because ultimately, you know, the book deals with serious issues. It deals with the concept of emotional and psychological violence, gaslighting. These are serious and heavy issues. And to make it light, I very deliberately spent a lot of time and effort in trying to use humor as a literary device, to make it funny, because we don't want to engage with the issues that we have to engage with all the time, violence, etc., in a way that makes us all go to bed for the next 30 days. So, you know, there was what is the conduit and the medium of telling a story that speaks to some of the big social issues that we're grappling with.
Yeah, thanks. Fred?
My main protagonist is Nozizwe, as I said, a 15-year-old girl from Zimbabwe, the southern part of Zimbabwe, Bulawayo, who suddenly finds herself and her family being forced to migrate to South Africa. There are problems in the country, war veterans harassing people, and the family flees to South Africa. I love the phrase that you've just used. You said broken landscape. Is that what you said? I'm going to steal that from you.
Please do.
Okay. So they get to this broken country which is faced with its own challenges and so on. So the story is a celebration of that odyssey, basically. In writing the book, I was trying to explore the trauma, the psychological impact of forced migration on the lives of children. We read in newspapers how people flee Zimbabwe to South Africa. But I thought to make the story fresher, more vulnerable, it would be great to use a young person, a child, as the focal point, or as the person telling the story, basically.
Okay. Dianne, jy gebruik taal op 'n baie spesifieke manier in die boek. Verskillende partyhoofstukke is geskryf in 'n tipe Noord-Kaapse Afrikaans. En ander is geskryf in Gaeltaal gemeng met Kaaps. Wat is Gaeltaal?
So, Gael is 'n taal wat ontstaan het in Distrik 6 deur die Khoi Colored Community se transgender diverse en drag queens genaamdlik QP. Die QP exhibition was ook net so om die draai 'n paar jaar terug. En dit is 'n taal wat gevorm is as 'n tipe veiligheidsvorm. So as daar strydmense naby is of mense wat ons in gevaar gaan hou, dan kuil ons sodat niemand anders moet hoor wat ons sê nie. Ek gou kan sê, "Ooh, Bettina, daai bag lyk 'n bietjie Riva. Ooh, pas op vir hy skieligheid. Draai daar 6 o'clock." You know, so 'n veiligheid wat ook 'n huis. En ek dink dit is wat ons almal se moedertong moet wees. Is 'n tuiste en 'n veiligheid vir ons. En nie almal van ons voel altyd baie tuis in die taal wat vir ons geonderrig was of gegee was nie, of ewen die families waarin ons grootgemaak is nie. En dit is dan wanneer iets soos Gael 'n nuwe huis kan oopmaak vir iemand wat veral weggegooi word of so.
Okay. Op 'n stadium in die boek beskryf een van jou karakters Gaeltaal as moffie-taal. Wanneer is dit okay om moffie te sê en wanneer is dit 'n saak vir die Menseregte Kommissie?
So ek dink dis wat gebash word met die woord. Die woord is joune. Jy kan daarmee doen wat jy wil. If you're calling it to me, I'll decide if I want to claim it or not. So ek dink dit het te doen met baie woorde waarmee mens baie soop mense tone trap.
Ja.
Dis jou keuse of jy daai woord wil vat of nie. As hy woord absoluut niks met jou te doen het nie, dan moet jy hom dalk maar een kant skuif.
Ek dink is Maya Angelou wat een keer gesê het, "It's not what they call you, it's what you answer to that's important."
En is ook RuPaul wat sê, "Doesn't matter what you call me as long as you call me," you know? En ek dink as iets met as long as you give me money ook, so please give me money, I don't mind.
En dis ook wel bag vandaan kom, nee?
Yes,
Ja,
die
okay.
money bag.
Die money bag.
Ook die man bag.
Okay. Joy, early in your novel, Sadiq, and I want you to just, or maybe don't explain who Sadiq is, says to Lolly, and I need to read this, there's no binary between bully and victim. Each of us have the ability to oscillate between the two roles. Now, my question to you is, should we sympathize with bullies, see the potential victimhood they might have experienced? And I'd like the two of you to also respond to that.
So I think, we tend to sort of look at bullies and victims, perpetrators on a sort of continuum, and that they're binary, you're either this or you're that. And what I wanted to play with in the book is the notion of how we as human beings are complex, and that we have the capacity to be both, in certain instances, the victim, and in different instances, the perpetrator. And so calling ourselves to look at the lens, look at ourselves through the under the lens, and to see the potential that we sometimes have to harm others as much as other people cause us harm. And because this is a book about emotional and psychological hurting, I didn't want to make it straightforward. I wanted that there are no necessarily moral higher grounds, that all the characters in one way or another come with some layer of complexity.
Ja.
Daarmee saam, ek het die een karakter, die seker maar die groot antagonis in die boek, is 'n polisieman wat
Ja, ek gaan daaroor later bietjie, maar so moenie te veel weggee
maar
nie.
ja, net so 'n bietjie gee van dit. En die groot ding van daai karakter is hy begin amper as 'n allegory of the violence being perpetrated against trans and gender diverse bodies. And then later on, we also see this as a human who also has desires and dreams and love in 'n family. En daai was ook vir my belangrik om te wys, want meeste van die karakters in my boek was nog net gesideline baie keer as dit by die letterkunde kom, half nie voltooi of klaar ingekleer nie. Daarom was dit vir my belangrik dat hulle almal, even die perpetrators ook, vleisiekie aan hulle het, want ons almal hoort ergens en ons almal verdien 'n plek. Maak nie saak wat se, kak ons aanvang. Ja.
Fred?
Yeah, bullying is a thread that runs through this book.
Yeah.
We see the Nosizo's family being bullied by the war veterans in Zimbabwe, and to such an extent that they have to flee the country for South Africa, relative safety and security and so on, only to find that once they've crossed the river into South Africa, they are going to be buffeted by different winds and challenges and so on. Bullying of a different nature, in the sense that in South Africa they are kwerekweres, they are foreigners, they get discriminated against. It's this whole notion of xenophobia, and you look differently or you speak differently from us. So she has to devise some means to protect herself. She's a woman, she's a girl, young woman, in a very violent society. So she has to find a way to protect herself, and she masquerades as a boy.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask you about that later on.
Yeah.
All three protagonists experience violence as a child, and for Lolly and Dora, that's carried over into adulthood. Of course, your story is seen from the viewpoint of a child, so she doesn't grow up. All three of you, in some way, describe the violence as quite casually. Now, my question is, gender-based violence in South Africa, is it as casually accepted as the three of you make it out in your books? Should it be? Fred, you can start.
I suppose, I haven't read the books, let me admit, so I'll speak on behalf of my own book. The way I portray violence is to show that it's become so accepted by society, that it's second nature, it comes as second nature. But I was hoping that by putting it out there, society would be challenged to say this is not acceptable at whatever level. So that was my kind of ambition, to say, let's expose this and deal with it for what it is.
Yeah.
I think I had a very similar approach. So it's interesting that my book, that one of the central themes is about violence, but it's actually not really dealt with or mentioned. And I did that very deliberately. So initially in the reading of the manuscript, when it was sort of almost finalized, the violence that happens to Lolly as a child is not ever named. And in fact, there was an allusion to it, but it's not named. And then I made the allusion a little clearer, through a dialogue that she has. And it's sort of named, but not quite. And I did that deliberately because I feel that as South Africans, we are so, we've become so conditioned to the newspaper headlines and the horrific scenes of violence that happen on a daily basis that I didn't need to paint a picture for my reader to know about violence in our country. It is normalized, and also politically, I didn't want to write a book that appeals to an audience who needs to see the blood and the gory details and the intestines hanging on the floor. Politically, the agenda was that I'm talking about violence without making it graphic, but also I'm trying to show that physical violence is not necessarily the only violence that matters, that emotional and psychological violence over a period of time, a sustained period of time, is as destructive in creating broken people. And I just want to come back, if I may, to something that Fred mentioned when he was talking about xenophobia. In some ways, also my book, being called The Other Me, is about somebody who is othered. So we have notions, whether it is in a sense of how we engage as South Africans with foreign nationals, how we see them as not belonging within the space. We are very quick as a society, and it's ironic given our apartheid context and where we had to actually, go and seek asylum in other countries. It's very ironic that we have become a society where othering is so prominent in our national discourse, where the extent to which people are different from us really matters. And this cuts across, research shows, it cuts across race, class, and gender divides. That South Africans have sentiments that are very hostile towards foreigners in our country. And in the book, on a smaller scale, Lolly is a square peg in a round hole. She doesn't fit in. She's trying to find a way of fitting in. And the book works with that narrative of the struggle to fit in amongst people who don't easily find a place for you because they're so busy measuring up who they are in their tribal and their group identities, and how that becomes the predominant story is who are we as a ethnic race group, whatever it might be, and how the harm that we do, that we don't see that we're doing as a repercussion of that.
So daar's die een karakter in my boek, Jamie. En Jamie die toespraak wat sy lewer voordat sy haar performance poetry vertoning gee. En dan sê sy dat, dan praat sy van gender-based violence en dat die president so 'n klem lê daarop. Maar dat hy nog steeds net praat van die kinders en die cisgendered vroue. Nou wat dan van die transgender en gender diverse persone? As ons dan spesifiek kyk na die woord gender-based violence, why are we still being excluded as a community? En daai is 'n groot ding wat ek probeer toelaat het om deur te gly in die res van die boek. En dan wat geweld ook aanbetref, is dit amper alledaags. Ek dink miskien dis wat jy bedoel, want baie van die geweld wat gebeur is al so normaal, die girl weet, okay, ek stap gou taxi rank toe, ek kry gou ietsie, ek gaan daai kyk kry, this one wants to fuck me, that one wants to kill me, that one wants to do both, and it's normal. Dit is realiteite wat dalk ander mense gaan ontskok of ontnigter, maar dit is die werklikheid daarvan. En
Maar dit word nooit grafies uitgebeeld nie.
Sekere dele in die boek word dit natuurlik grafies uitgebeeld, wat ook belangrik is. Veral as ons kyk na headlines wat al gebeur het, soos David O'Lyn se verkrachting, moord, verbranding in 'n klein dorpie in Ceres, en even Jamie Adnan Davids, transgender en gender diverse persone wie wreedaardig in gemeenskappe gemartel, verkrag en vermoor word, en daar kom net nooit verder iets daarvan nie. So dit was my belangrik vir ons as 'n gemeenskap ook om oor hierdie goeters te begin praat. In ons wys, soos wat ons ook wil. Maar as 'n mens spesifiek kyk na die geweld, en in my boek was dit ook vir my belangrik om te kyk na amper, soos wat Joy nou praat, van die verskillende shades van perpetrator en victim. Dan later aan hoe een van die girls in die boek besef, ek gaan nooit justice kry vir die geweld wat teenoor my gebeur het nie. So ek gaan gereg in my eie hande neem. To actually say, is anybody going to help you if you're not going to help yourself? Should we start fighting for ourselves instead of going to the police? Because ek het hordes en hordes en hordes boetas en sisters wat net nooit polisie toe gaan nie. Want ons word verder verneder en verkleineer en abuse in die polisiestasies.
Okay. Dis een van my vrae wat jy nou besig is. Het jy in my boek gekyk terwyl ek weg was?
Miskien.
Okay, hierdie vraag, jy praat van dat die geweld as normaal aanvaar word, dat transgender persone weet, hulle aanvaar, daar gaan geweld wees.
En die persone rondom hulle ook aanvaar, dit moet so gebeur.
Is jy as 'n wit transgender persoon veiliger as 'n bruin of swart transgender persoon? Of
Definitief. En in my gemeenskap ook. Ek is die enigste uit wit trans persoon in my gemeenskap in Namakwa-land waar ek woon. En daar's al so 'n wonderlike pad uitgelê deur die bruin en swart trans gemeenskap in Namaqualand. Ons pageants, guys. Ons in Namaqualand se pageants are to die for. Maar ook saam met dit, daar is amper okay, mense sal sien, okay, fine, jy's so, but okay, ons gaan jou eerder los, ons moet seker vir jou tannie sê of juffrou sê of iets, waar my vriendin wat langs my loop, Leslie, sal gouer 'n naam kry as wat ek het kry. Sy is gelukkig 'n polisievrou, 'n trans polisievrou plaaslik. So dit help daarom om die uniform te hê. Maar nee, ek dink meeste van wat ek al geleer het van om op te staan vir myself en om trots te wees, kom van die bruin en swart trans gemeenskap af. So ek sal definitief sê ek is veiliger, veral as ons kyk na die geweld wat plaasvind teenoor transpersone. Dan is dit meestal bruin en swart trans en genderdiverse persone in laer of werkersklas gemeenskappe wat getarget word. Waar ek nog na mamma en pappa toe kan gaan as my omstandighede te moeilik raak en ja, geprotect word, al nie altyd emotionally nie, maar ek kan ten minste weet my life is gonna be okay. Ja.
Ek wil nou na 'n pageant toe gaan.
Oh, hello. We're actually having one in October, Miss
Vertel,
Adiuke.
vertel.
Yes, so Miss Adiuke is ons groot pageant wat ons het. Ons het ons uitdinne, Springbok, Steenkof, Persig, Valwater en dan nou die top girls kom Miss Adiuke toe. En ek is ook besig om te praat met die plattelanders, so hopelik gaan ons so 'n feature.
Miskien kan jy vir Joy kry om een van die beoordelaars te wees. Dan sê rede om te wees.
Okay, hallo.
Ek is daar, my vriend.
Yes. Okay, yes.
Sien daar, soos my nog 'n connection.
Uitgesol. Sal jou beoordeel?
Ja, natuurlik.
Shabba, Fred, judge.
Prachtig, Namaqualand daisies.
Yes.
Sorted. Okay, Joy, Fred. Both your protagonists are passing. You've spoken a bit about how your Nosizwe is passing. Joy, Lolly's also passing to some extent to protect herself, to fit in. Could both of you speak to the ways in which your characters are passing? You've started, so just...
Yes, as they are fleeing, well, they've crossed the river already. They are in South Africa, and they have a nasty encounter with this group of people who they mistook for protectors. These people are human traffickers, and they are men, obviously. They are armed, and the girl realizes, if I'm to survive going forward, let me think fast, and she does, and she becomes a boy immediately, and throughout the Odyssey, she behaves like a boy until somebody outs her, not really successfully, because she's smart, she can think of it on her feet. So generally, she succeeds at passing as a boy, for a boy. Yeah.
Okay. Joy?
So in my book, I think that there's, when we talk about passing, there's both in a literal sense, but also in a metaphoric sense. And literally, Lolly grows up on the Cape Flats and is forced to move by circumstances. She's adopted by a white family in Newlands. And this is sort of backstory that's dealt with very briefly in the book. And she's adopted by this family. The book is set in her childhood is in the 80s, so it's in apartheid times. She's fair-skinned, and as people of colored people in the time would do, if they passed the pencil test and so on, they'd get some of the colored people, let me correct that, who sold out.
I would never pass.
So, I mean, the irony is, unfortunately, it's caused conflict in my family because my dad's brother, and they never saw each other again after this happened. So she is adopted by a white family because she's fair-skinned, has green eyes, and is able to pass as white. But that is just, so, and it plays into the sort of identity crisis, but that's just, the backstory. I think the more bigger issue and the metaphoric passing is the primary focus of the book is this toxic relationship between her and the man that she marries, Sadiq. And the passing there is, how do I show up in a relationship, because I so desperately want this thing. I want the things that it can give me, a sense of belonging, a sense of nurture, the social status that comes with being coupled. How do I have all these things so that I tick all the boxes of being socially orthodox? But in fact, the passing in that sense is just desperately trying to wear the mask of the fitting in person, but you don't actually fit in. And I mean, it's wonderful hearing how all three books kind of speak to this, like, the xenophobia, the trans issues, the desperate fight to belong and fit in, and how there isn't space to kind of take our skins off and our masks off and just be and breathe and be accepted for who and what we are.
Het is nogal interesting, sorry Bettina, dat albei boeke passing ook spesifiek aantrek. En dis ook natuurlik iets baie groot in die transgender community, to pass as the gender you identify with. En ek het nogal baie spesifiek in my novel gekyk dat daar nie gefokus word daarop nie. Because there's such an obsession with, who's the fishiest of them all, or be like, Maar what actually happens to these characters when they don't actually strive to pass, when we're actually rather embracing ons differentheid, en wat dan gebeur? And also, then almost making peace with the fires and the battles that are coming to your side. So it's quite interesting. And Fred, I also wanted to ask, I haven't read the book, but was it also intentional, the trans reference, the girl moving into the boy manifestation, and the outing also happening?
It was deliberate. Yeah, it was deliberate because she's always had this identity, even back before the flight from Zimbabwe. She always played with boys rather than girls and so on. Now the transformation manifests itself physically and more urgently now that she has to use that identity to protect herself. Yeah.
Okay. Mag ek nou weer
Ja,
vra?
sorry.
Nee, ek trek gebeel. Dis lekker as julle met mekaar gesels. In jou boek, soos jy sê, word dan nie van passing gepraat nie, maar wanneer Dora terug gaan huis toe, cover sy. Wil jy ietsie daaroor sê?
Afhaal, ja. Ek dink baie mense verstaan nie baie keer, especially met male to female trans. There's a lot of putting up. En baie mense het actually al vir my gevra, what if you take all of it off? En daar's iets so intens persoonlik daaraan, to actually put it all up, of het nou die make-up of earrings en hare en whatever is. It's almost asof jy jou binnekant inkleer met die buitekant. So daai hele proses van huis toe gaan en baie persone deel daarmee. Nie net trans en gender diversie, maar die hele LGBTQ+, met hierdie idee van dat daar iets van ons verwag word om as te lyk. En nou om terug te gaan en jy haal alles af. Dit is verskriklik, dit doen iets verskriklik aan 'n mens se menswaardigheid. To take something out of yourself and to leave it because it's not worthwhile or it's not acceptable or it's not waar actually baie families and communities and skole can actually improve the well-being of children so much by allowing more, It's not harming anyone, put your lipstick on, sit your earrings op, So daai hele proses van passing as in hiding what's left. Daar's een toneel waar sy haarself spoeg in die spieël, by die toilets, by 'n Appington se garage. En daai was 'n groot ding, die struggling met self. And also figuring out if this is who I am, why is the whole world telling me I'm not this?
Okay. Now, we spoke about the police earlier, and in none of the three books, the police are portrayed in a very positive light. Nosizwe finds that the police is incompetent, they don't care, and they're racist. Joy, in your book, Lolly doesn't even consider the police as an option except as in passing. She just does her own thing. En die answers wat jy vroeër na verwys het, die polisie is perpetrators aan die begin. En vir 'n groot deel is hulle die perpetrators. As jy 'n kommentaar kan lewer, if you could comment on what do you think the police ought to do to improve relations with communities that are other? Are there things that could be improved? By the police specifically. And you have 1 minute to do it in, and now you can speak for the rest of the week.
Wow. They could start by getting rid of Tele, for example. Joking.
Yeah.
No, it's very difficult because the force is corrupt, it's incompetent.
And it's a force.
It's a force.
It's a force.
It's not a police service. Although they style themselves as a service, you are never serviced by them. It's a force, so the legacy from that past is still there.
Yeah.
So a lot of retraining needs to happen, I think. So in terms of how they should be dealing with the other, it's a major challenge. It's a South African challenge. So it's not limited to the police service or
But
police
it's institutionalized within this
It is
place.
institutionalized, of course. The minute you get there and they hear an accent they are not familiar with, the attitude changes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, that thinking about the institution of police, it forms part of the broader landscape of institutions of state. Like the police have been captured, it's part of state capture, it doesn't function properly. There's a whole body of evidence. Karen Dolly, I think, is most eloquently written about this, how they collude with gangs and so on. But I'm also interested in how, and so there's definitely a space to look at how to fix that and the role of what a different kind of policing should be in our society. But I'm also very aware that in our society, our way of tackling social issues, so for example, like xenophobia, is a law enforcement, border control response, as opposed to a coordinated operational framework of government interventions that don't just deal with law enforcement, but deal with, over a long-term period, the changing of social norms. And that, I think, is far more important than policing. While there's a role and a time and a place for it,
Sure.
Our responses have got to be bigger than policing. It's got to be about social values and the prevention of violence, looking at the community initiatives that work to prevent violence and how we raise consciousness about those sort of things. Because there's only so much policing you can do to respond and be reactive to violence. It's about the violence not happening in the first place.
Sure. Yeah, and getting rid of the menace of police, it's a facetious thing. It won't solve anything because the culture is embedded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that, Joy and Fred. Especially looking at the apartheid legacy of police violence and what happened with the Vlakplaas, which was interrogated by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Looking at how the police was also brainwashed, but also bullied, I guess. Yeah, but also excused themselves from it. Looking at how the black-on-black violence was also, aangevier, by them. There's so much internal hate and power play still happening there. I wonder sometimes if it's a muscle memory by the police. This thing of power and, and justice, or not justice at all, just power and hate. And for me, I've been wondering, like sensitivity training, I know sensitivity training has been done and is being done, especially with police officers and trans sex workers, but there's not a lot of resultate wat kom daarvan. So I think all of this training and stuff needs to stop, and maybe there also needs to be better psychological support for the policemen, because maybe they're also losing their minds.
Oh yeah, that's true. I mean, if you read Dion Meyer's crime novels, for example, Grisel, Gissel is messed up in the head. And he's a living manifestation of what happened in the past, and that's been carried through into the current police force. So there's the concept of muscle memory is real. Yeah.
Can I add one thing there? So
Go for it.
a long time ago, well, not a long time, a couple of years ago, I did a study where we worked with police stations and the National Prosecuting Authority to look at service provision to victims of gender-based violence. And one of the things that really sat with me is in talking to the police is that they have psychosocial support available as a service to debrief the violence that they engage with. There's no uptake. And largely because of the perceived social stigma in the construction of masculinity and what it means to be a policeman. No one wants to be seen going into the counselor's office to go for psychosocial support.
Exactly.
Okay, last question from my side, and after that I'm going to take one or two questions from the audience. Last question from my side. We've spoken in the last 45 minutes about the various ways in which your characters are vulnerable. All of them move to improve their lives. Nosizwe from Zimbabwe to South Africa, Lolly first from the Cape Flats to Newlands, and then when she marries Sadiq. Your Dora moves to Cape Town and then back to Springbok, no Carolusberg. In a sense, even though they moved to better their situation, they all ended up being in more vulnerable situations. Would you like to speak to that, each of you?
I think this idea of going home, coming home, it's never easy. And a lot of times, your home is also the unsafest place there is. So this idea of running towards home because home is your safety after maybe losing everything or being abused. Daai hele gedagte. The thing about home is also inside of us. So there are so many places, especially met Dora, waartoe sy in haarself ook moet gaan en haarself konfronteer. En dit is dan wanneer ek veral moet magiese realisme gebruik maak. Om actually dit net vir ons bietjie 'n ander route te sit om te wys. You know what, sometimes the magic of it all is sometimes necessary to resolve, a lot of family trauma that has happened, because a lot of times in homes it's a cycle, this blood circle that we're in, and sometimes you just never can escape. It's this intergenerational trauma that keeps on continuing. So going home also has a purpose. So for Dora, going back home, she had a mission she had to do, and it was kind of to break this violence once and for all inside her family. So it wasn't easy, but it's also necessary. And I think we should also not shy away from the responsibility, which is home. Sometimes we want to fix all of the issues around us instead of the smaller ones just here. And a lot of people have asked me, how do parents now deal with this? A child comes out and they're trans. And that journey you have to go with the child, it's also a movement, a separation of something. Going from, this is my child I actually need to say goodbye to, because there's a newer one, but this is still my child. And I think that's still the same thing of the moving that happens. We can run as far as we want to, but our home will always find us.
So this is maybe a Democrat way of answering the question, but the lockdown showed us how movement as a concept is fundamentally important to the human experience, and how we all felt when we were restricted and had our movement curtailed. We moved to work, we moved to places of recreation, we moved to be in nature, we move our ideas, we move across borders. And I think that the idea that I was trying to play with in the book is that while Lolly moves in a sort of geographical sense, she moves from the Cape Flats into Newlands, which supposedly comes with the opportunity and the resources to move her ideas. That doesn't happen. And so it's being trapped, the book speaks to being trapped in particular patterns of thinking. When your cognitive view of the world, the way you see everything around you is like in this box, and you believe that this is what I need, this is the problem, this is the solution, and you straitjacketed by that. And I think, so the broader message for me is, like, the movement of ideas is very important to me. I always kind of have to check myself, the way that I'm thinking about things, and I'm deeply attached to, might there be more different ways of thinking about issues? And so it's critical to be reading, to be amongst people who are different, to stimulate that kind of intellectual engagement, because that's how we galvanize the movement for change. It's changing how we think. And Lolly doesn't change how she thinks. She's stuck. She's stuck in the same old pattern of victimhood and destructive behavior.
Fred?
Tough act to follow. Yeah, we as human beings are migratory animals. We always are moving, always in constant motion for various reasons. It could be work, it could be forced removals, it could be anything. So I have just realized, having listened to Joyce now, I realize that almost all my books are about movement of one form, in one form or another, because of who I am, where I come from. I'm from a province by the sea, kingdom by the sea, KwaZulu-Natal. And my mother is from a township. My father came from a rural background. So all these movements and migrations had an impact on how I grew up and how I perceive myself. I don't live in that province anymore. I live in Johannesburg. In making that transition, it was emotional, it was psychological, it was linguistic, because the kind of Zulu that we speak in Joburg is a different kind of Zulu, and so on. So now that I've just listened to your very profound way of expressing it and articulating it, it resonates with me and the story that I've tried to tell.
I want to go home now. You just said that I said something. The day can't get better. The king himself.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? There's a hand. So let me just check whether there are other hands. No? There'll be a mic coming down to you.
Thank you very much for an inspiring and fascinating discussion. And it's going to be a real problem for my pensioners' budget because I can't afford all three. But the whole issue of violence, do you think that it's because all of us are in deep need of violence, of healing? And hence it just manifests itself in these very different violent ways in our lives, both in the sacrosanct home that's supposed to be the sacred place, and society, but also the whole issue of xenophobia. I'd rather want to say, isn't it maybe a more sense of Afrophobia? Because, I mean, where I live, there are all these Europeans from Italy to Chile, and they don't experience it. So it's something about poor people and resources, and it's sad that we spoke so much about Ubuntu, but it's all past tense, isn't it? But thanks very much for wonderful discussion.
Sorry, are your question directed to Fred or to all of us?
No, I think the question about that we are a wounded people as South Africans, and we've never ever had. There were little bits of things around the TRC, and Healing of Memories does something, and little NGOs, but there's nothing coordinated. And I know that Rwanda has many challenges, but at least they do every year for 3 months. They do something and they look at it. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose we made a mistake. We treated the TRC as an event. We've done it now, it's gone, and we are going to be happy together and so on, which is a fallacy. So the healing process should be a process, in fact, because we are a messed up people as a country, because we have a very violent past, and that is dogging us, that is haunting us now. And hence the GBV issues, problems that we are faced with, and Afrophobia. It's very accurate, Afrophobia, because the poorer people lash out at those that they have access to, that those they can bully. I mean, the Russians, the Ukrainians who live in this country are well resourced. They are armed. They have money. Therefore, it's not easy to attack them, to vent your spleen on them, because they are kind of distant. So you lash at the less empowered and impoverished victims of society.
And just to say that the state is the engine driving that, because if we think about during apartheid times, like migration happened predominantly from Europe to the country, right? And we, Department of Home Affairs, processed permanent residency a lot more quickly, and people got that status. Now, since the year 2000, the migrants coming in are predominantly from the continent. And we have research showing us that 10% of the applications are approved for permanent residency, 20% are rejected, and the vast majority, 70%, lays in no person's land of bureaucracy where they just never are addressed. So there's very much that sentiment of Afrophobia. And I mean, interestingly, research is also showing us that the African people coming into the country are semi and highly skilled. So the narrative that we've constructed that they are taking jobs is false. You know, they plug skills gaps that we need, in fact. And then and the state's response to this is engineered, it is conscious, it is an attempt to keep Africans out. Like the concept of African Renaissance is long gone. And then just very briefly on the issue of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it is just so sad that initiative to a large extent was a failure. And I think that what we've not engaged enough with is the concept of restorative social justice. What does that look like? And how do we begin to engage with that?
Okay. Ek gaan jou nie toelaat om op te antwoord nie. There's one last question from the audience. In front here. The mic's coming your way.
Thank you very much to all of you for a very inspiring discussion. My question is actually in regards to what you last spoke about, and particularly to Fred. As Zimbabweans are now forced to go home or underground, will you be writing a sequel to your book?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Are you writing a sequel to the book? To Crossing
Sequel
the River?
to...
Yeah.
Yeah, sequel to that one in particular, because obviously first they had to flee from Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Now they might be forced to go back home or underground.
Oh yeah, no, it's early days to think of a sequel, but it's logical. It's logical because now Nozizwe is here in South Africa and she's undergoing, well, she's been confronted with all these challenges. Then what happens? So
Yeah.
nice idea. Thank you.
You want part of the royalties, right?
Such as they are.
Thank you to all three of you. It was lovely, and it was so nice to have a discussion amongst yourselves and not me have to facilitate all the time.
Great.
Thank you so much. It was an informative and it was an interesting discussion. To the audience, all three books are available at the, you know where the library area is? The bookstore area. Please buy all three. It's worth the read. They will be at the signing table to sign. If you want to take a picture with them, you can hand me 50 bags, 100 bags, whatever, and you can take the picture with them. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thank you. Thank you.